because I'm really excited about our next guest as well. Artur Wilczynski. He came to Canada as a little boy, fleeing Poland. He has been ambassador in Norway for some years now, and I have this impression of Canada that they manage something when it comes to integrating refugees and migrants and people coming to their country. Maybe there's something for the rest of the world to learn. I'm curious, why do I have this impression of Canada being good at these things? Is it because they have a handsome prime minister? Maybe, but I think there's more. I'm pretty sure there's more. And that's why I'm super excited to welcome to stage Artur Wilczynski, Canada's ambassador to Norway. Welcome.
Hi, alle sammen. Hey, Peter.
Hello.
How are you? Good
Hi,
to see you.
How are you? Good to see you.
Thanks.
Please.
I love the backdrop.
I know, right?
It makes me feel at home.
Yeah. It's this is something that Norway and Canada kind of have in common.
This could have been at my hutta up in the Laurentians, north of Montreal.
Yeah. Yeah, and this is on the wall of my apartment most of the time, but today I brought it here so we can have a little of that hit the feeling.
Sounds good, very kushly.
But tell me, thank you. But then again, so am I. But tell me, why do you think I have this impression that Canada is so good when it comes to integrating refugees and migrants and stuff?
Well, first of all, I have to say that I'm glad that you do. It's better than the alternative. But I think Canada has a reputation because the face that we put to the world is one that's very diverse. Whether or not it's at the political level, at the cultural level, I think most people have this perception of Canada as one where diversity is valued. It's an integral part of our identity, and it is. But it's also not something that you want to take for granted. Number one, and number two, it's not something that's always been true. I think that our history is one that really has had its troubled past, particularly when it comes to Indigenous peoples, First Nations, Inuit, Métis. And I think for those of us who have come to Canada later on as immigrants, we have to understand and recognize that history is one that hasn't always been accommodating, hasn't always been welcoming, and continues to be one where Indigenous peoples in our country still face fundamental discrimination. But we have done a lot of work. I mean, I think there are a lot of people who have come to the country, who have integrated well, who have found opportunities, and continue. Every year, Canada welcomes 300,000 people. People who come as immigrants, people who come as refugees. They come to large cities like Toronto and Vancouver, where more than half the population was born outside the country. We have 13 ethnic groups with more than 1 million people. And in fact, Norwegians, there's over 400,000 Canadians with Norwegian as an ancestry. So I think that context helps fuel the perception, and I want it to continue, but I think it's important for me as a public servant and as a Canadian to acknowledge that we haven't always done well. We continue to have challenges, and we have to continue to work at it.
Yeah, because what do you think that the world has? Is there something we can learn from Canada? Like, what is working with your immigration policies?
Well, there's a lot, I think, that's working with immigration. First of all, it's the acceptance that we are an immigrant-receiving society. I think that's one of the things that differentiates us from a lot of places. We don't only look at immigration as something that accidentally happens. For us, immigration is something that we seek. We want people. We need people to come into our country. Canada is a vast geographic territory. We're 10 million square kilometers with a population of 35 million people. Our north is very, very sparsely populated. We need people to come in for labor market needs. But we've got three different types of immigrant categories that come in. We've got economic immigrants. We've got family class, because we think it's really important to bring families of immigrants to reunite them, because it creates a social network that helps them integrate. And we have refugees. And I think that one of the elements on the refugee side that is particularly, I think, helpful is private sponsorship. So it's not just governments that bring people in and help them, but it's individuals, it's communities, it's organizations that decide that they're going to bring a family. They're invested in the success of that family's integration.
Financially?
Absolutely. They have to take on a commitment for at least a year where they're responsible for everything from welcoming at their airport when they arrive, helping them find housing, and then supporting them financially for a year. So this isn't a small expense. This could be many, many thousands of dollars. And you know what? There's lineups. People, the demand to sponsor refugees to come into Canada is very high. And in fact, lots of communities want refugees because they see this as part of their plan for the long-term health of their communities. So for example, in small towns in Atlantic Canada, communities have sponsored large families and many families, 5 or 6 families in a small town. And they see this as an important way to ensure that the school stays open, that access to medicine is still available in those communities. Because one of the phenomena inside Canada, as it is in a lot of countries, is that communities in the periphery, in the north, in the countryside, they lose their young people to large centers like Toronto, Vancouver, Montreal, Calgary. And this is a way to bring newcomers to those communities and make them more vibrant and sustainable in the long term.
You've said some about the challenges in Canada about these issues, but what do you think is the main challenge when it comes to the refugee situation and integrating of people with a different cultural?
So I think that there's a number of challenges. Number one, I think that people's expectations are very high. So your perception, the one that you talked about, how Canada is so welcoming, unfortunately for a lot of people isn't the reality when they get there. Right. Racism is still an issue. Employment can be problematic for people. Having your credentials recognized still is a challenge. But I think that acknowledging those challenges and having strategies to try and deal with them is what I think helps create an environment where people feel welcome and can succeed. But again, I don't want to be Pollyanna about Canada. There are real issues. Discrimination and racism is still a reality. And we have to work at it every day. But I think the reason why we are successful is because, one, we acknowledge it's a problem, and two, both as a country and as a government, we feel that we need to put in place policies and programs aimed at helping newcomers participate fully in the society. That they, when they arrive in Canada, they know if they land as landed immigrants and become permanent residents, that they have a pathway to become citizens. And as citizens, they can participate fully and actively in the economic, the cultural, and the political life of the country. And for us, that's a fundamental part of who we are as Canadians.
You were you weren't too old when you came to Canada yourself.
Yeah, I was a little guy.
You were a little guy, yeah. How were you welcomed when you and your family came back in the...
Look, I think my experience was rather typical. I mean, I was quite young when we came to Canada. We were sponsored by relatives. My grandmother's cousin came to Canada before the Second World War, and he and his family sponsored my family to come to Montreal. When we arrived in Montreal, I was almost 3 years old, and I was put in a good school. I had access to good health care. I had support from family, from friends, from neighbors. I had support from institutions like education, like health care, and I felt welcome. And it's one of the reasons why, for me, it became so important to try and give back to the country that gave me and my family essentially everything. So for me, it's been a spectacularly positive experience. But again, like I said, I have to acknowledge that that's not everybody's experience. Sure. I come from a sense of privileged background. One of the things that I need to acknowledge is that I'm a white man in North America, and the experience for white men, unfortunately, is still one of privilege compared to others. So while I might also be a member of a religious minority, I'm a gay man who's here with my husband who's watching. Hey, Randy. And all that said, I can still blend. I don't have a thick accent. I've learned English. I've learned French. So for me, that is a particular type of experience. So I need to recognize that I have a responsibility as somebody who's been successful in that integration to reach out and to speak for those who face challenges that I didn't.
Isn't there something of yeah, I do believe that some of the key to I mean, acknowledging that there's problems, right? Like you say that not all is perfect, and to acknowledge that in the first place is one step on the way. But also you somehow stating pretty clearly that you have a lot of
Privilege.
Exactly. Just by being a white male in North America is also a part of the way to acknowledge, to see how the world is actually looking today in Canada. And
yeah, and I think that again, for those of us who are in positions of privilege, and I think that those of us who live in countries like Canada and Norway have to acknowledge that compared to a lot of places in the world, we are born with a whole lot of privilege, and that it becomes a question of what do you do with it, and how do you try and make the world a better place. And I think that that's why for Canada and for the Canadian government, actually reaching out and encouraging people to come, and particularly in the context, for example, of the current refugee crisis, when we see what's happening in Syria, the government of Canada specifically went out and brought 30,000 refugees to Canada as quickly as possible. So it was a big issue in our election last year. This is actually it's almost 1 year today that we had an election in Canada. And one of the things that the government wanted to do was bring in 30,000 refugees, and it's done so, and it's exceeded that in terms of Syria. And the demand is so high and so great. But it was how Canadians reacted to that in terms of recognizing that we as Canadians have tremendous privilege, and that we have space, we have resources, we have a need. We can accommodate people from around the world, particularly who have had such a horrible time, and give them the safety and security that they need, and support them and nurture them. Because you know what? When you do that to people, when you do that for people, they'll give back. Again, it's part of how I felt. It's I feel this incredible responsibility to give back to my country because of what it has given me. Here we are saving tens of thousands of people, giving them and their families opportunities. The human wealth, the human potential of those people, their children, their grandchildren, when they eventually, in terms of what they will give to Canada, is remarkable. We've done it before in terms of refugees from places like Hungary, from Vietnam, and we did it well, and I think that it's why Canadians have been so open to this latest crisis and bringing people in.
But what if you should give one advice for the people of Norway, maybe more than the government of Norway? Where do we start? Because Norway is a very different country than Canada. So I mean, it's not like we just take whatever the good things that you did and try to do it our way.
Yeah.
But
I think that Canada and Norway are very different, and I think it's important to acknowledge that the context in Europe and the context in North America is different. You can't walk to Canada. Swimming across the Atlantic or Pacific Oceans or across the Arctic is not an option. So we're in a different situation. But I think as human beings is to empathize with people who are in difficulty, is to think, what would you want people to do for you? How can you help someone who can have a better life? How can you reach out to those who are already here in a way that makes them feel welcome and part of your community, your friends, your school, your workplace? And I think that if it's broken down at the individual level, and one that shows a generosity of spirit, I think that goes a long way in creating an environment where people feel that they are invested in the success of your country and the success of your community, and I think that's a valuable thing.
Yeah. I'm curious if there's any questions that have popped up so far. It's not too late to post your questions, so if you're sitting wondering or want to just make a comment as well, this is This is the time to do it.
I just want to say you've got the most awesome hair.
Thank you.
I haven't had that much hair.
Oh, yeah.
I haven't had that much hair since 1982.
I probably just got it then because I was born 2 years later.
So that's what happened.
That's what happened. Blame the Norwegian. No, I'm kidding. Let's see.
Any questions from the audience? Or do they have to, they type?
They type as well.
No, no privilege sitting out there?
No privilege.
See?
Yeah, I have a little issue with my internet connection. Oh, no, here we go. Do you see, from Eirin, do you see a big difference in people's attitude towards refugees in Canada compared with Norway? What's in common and what's different? How can we get closer to Canada's success in including refugees? Well, the last part you already answered a little bit, but do you see a big difference in people's attitude, and what are the common similarities and what are the differences?
So I think that, again, in terms of my observation, I think that Norwegians reacted the way that a lot of Europeans reacted to seeing so many people coming at the same time, and I think that people's reactions have varied. I don't think you can sort of say that there's a single Norwegian reaction. I've seen some spectacularly generous men and women here in Norway